Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing Breaking Step chapter 47. I really thought I was ready. Yep, 47. I thought I'd prepared everything, but yeah. It's done, a man proclaimed from the inn's door. The room fell silent as everyone looked in the warrior's direction. The third floor's cleared. Quigley raised the fist. Soon it's on to the fourth floor. You know what? He doesn't need this. It's on to the fourth. Cheers erupted, most of his friends joining in except for Jackal, who looked at Tibs and lowered his voice. Any idea when that'll be? He shook his head. Not being able to speak with Stowe during the runs had meant that when he wondered about it, he couldn't ask. And it hadn't come up often since until they'd reached the boss room. Tibbs had been more focused on working the puzzles on that floor than wondering what came next. And in the few times he'd forced himself away from everything he needed to do in Craggle Rock to sit by the cliffside. Is that one word or two? By the cliffside and talk with Stowe. I guess not. It hadn't occurred to talk about the future runs. Don glanced at them, but Quigley was at their table, his team behind him. Take that, best team, the warrior smirked. We cleared it first. You know it's not a competition, right? Mez said. Of course it is, Jack replied as Quigley's team rolled their eyes nearly as one. And congratulations was the loot worth the fight? Not that we got to keep any of it, Doris said, looking around furtively, as you know, but it was a full set of plate armor with some enchantment on it. Too fancy for my taste anyway, but I'm sure a fighter like you, so interested in looking good for his man, could make use of it, if he was willing to buy it back from the guild. Jekyll snorted. Only if it's the... What the hell was going on with me? This is one, badly written, two, leftover from draft one, because it doesn't make sense from here. If he beats the room or is willing to buy it. All right, so, so interested in looking good for his man, could make use of it if he beats the room or is willing to buy it back from the guild. Jekyll snorted. Only if it's the same item for the next team, Don said, then looked at their sorcerers. I'm curious, how did you know it was enchanted? I could feel the weave when I picked up the helmet, Quigley said, which earned him a surprised look from Don. And I could sense it without having to touch it, the warrior's sorcerer said smugly. I am, after all, nearly Kappa. Tibbs looked at Don. For us to graduate to Kappa, we need to be able to tell apart the essences that make out a weave. Congratulations, he told the sorcerer, which earned him the surprised look. You shouldn't tell him that, the man replied, his admonition marred by his confusion at Don's behavior. You're free enough with what you can do, Don replied. It's not like they'll do anything with the information. Only sorcerers can think in the ways needed to tell essences apart. And tell me, Arabis, the man said with a hint of defiance in his tone, are you coming along in your studies toward ranking up? I'm getting there, Don replied casually, again surprising the sorcerer. Then, he said, his tone confident, I will look forward to observing you take the test, as I'll get ready to take the one for Epsilon. The Earth sorcerer turned and walked away. Kind of full of himself, that one, Jekyll commented. I think it's a sorcerer thing, quickly replied, them and knowing so much. I can tell you that knowing more than the rest of you has nothing to do with someone's ego, Don said. I know idiots with larger egos than that one, although he barely knows more than they do. Yep, Jekyll said with a smirk. Sorcerers and their ego. Do you have to love them? How hard was the room? We stepped in on our last run. The first fight was tough, so we didn't risk the second. It's hard. If you aren't already doing it, hoard the healing potions the dungeon gives because you're going to need them. I'm not going to say much more than that because this is one time. I don't want that don't talk about it rule causing us to miss a run. It was our fourth time in, and for a moment I didn't think we were going to survive the boss after the fights to reach it. I know how you feel about it, Tibs, but we got lucky. You fought everything in the room? Don asked pensively. No choice. If you think the previous boss rooms put your fighting to the test, this one makes the first time in those rooms feel like celebrating a hero's return. Thanks for the warning, Jekyll said, as unhelpful as it is. I'm telling you, stock up on all the potions. You're going to need them. The warrior left to rejoin his team at the table they'd taken. Are you sure there's a way around the fights? Jekyll asked once Quigley was away. Maybe not all of them, Don replied. We'll almost certainly have to fight the boss. But the floor's about being clever, Tibs added, on top of being good at fighting. So they cleared the room the hard way, Mez asked, and Tibs nodded. Which means, Jekyll smiled, that sorcerer theirs and his rogue aren't as smart as they think they are. Like there was any doubt of that, Don replied, rolling his eyes. Not so clever, are you? Erdian said, as a guard held Tibs before the commander. This could make your team miss another run. You can't keep me in a cell for 9 days. Tibs had waited until the schedule was up, and now that his team no longer went first with each schedule, I can change that. They'd ended up. I'm going to see what the readers say. Tibbs had waited until the schedule was up, and now that his team no longer went first with each schedule, they'd ended up last on this one. I can keep you as long as I think your crime deserves, Iridian replied flatly. It was just a pocket, and a noble's pocket at that, he grumbled, and I didn't even get a silver from it. He gave the guard an angry side-eye while she kept looking ahead. It had taken more work than it should have to get caught. He'd picked 3 pockets inside of guards before one of them noticed. Then, because Tibs didn't want to make it obvious he wanted to be caught, he ran, only to realize he'd lost a guard in the crowd and they hadn't seen enough of him to take up the chase when he walked back toward them. He knew these guards weren't idiots. They were part of those who had survived both Sebastian's attack on the town and his infiltration of the guards. But if not for Serba's dog, his attempt to be captured would have failed. The guard at his side had spotted him and given chase. She'd been better at keeping up, but Tibs had reached the point of risking looking eager to be caught when he'd been tackled to the ground by a large black and white dog, who then proceeded to sniff his pocket. Serba had rolled her eyes as Tibs gave the dog jerky, and she nearly let him go when he shook his head, moments before the guard caught up with him. Then the guard had brought Tibs to the closest guardhouse, where he'd been searched and freed of his tools. He'd replaced his usual bracers with normal ones because he didn't want to risk one of the guard had an element and sensed they were enchanted when they touched them, and so they'd have something and also they'd have something to find when he was caught. He'd also poorly hidden a few more on his persons, which... Wait, what? Freed of his tools. And also poorly hidden a few more picks on his person. on his person, which weren't all found. There was only one item he didn't want them to find, so he was disappointed others had others were missed in their scrutiny. He considered offering to train them, but figured Irdian wouldn't care for the suggestion, and that the other rogues would see it as helping the enemy instead of making everyone protecting Craggle Rock better. Once freed of his tool, of the tool of his trade, once freed of the tool of his trade they found, Tibbs's guard was instructed to take him to Irdian instead of to the cells. Are you under the impression nobles don't care when some thief picks their pocket? The commander asked in a bored tone. Tibbs wanted to remind the man he was a rogue, but it was a waste of time. They'd have to know it happened to care. He didn't even turn to look when she caught me. He gave a sharp nod to his capture. Did she look sorry? And do you think running from your capture will go unpunished? By adding 7 days to the two picking a pocket gets us? Tibbs asked, not having to ask dismayed. Unlike Harry, Irdian wasn't all about the rules, but he was filled with so much metal he was unbending about how things were done. He'd add as many days to Tibbs' sentence as he could justify, but not 1 day more. Maybe you need to train your guards some more if you don't want us to slip by them so easily. Insulting my people will not help your cause. Case. Cause? Yeah, your case. Tibbs shrugged. I'm not insulting. I'm pointing out flaws on how they're trained. Take him away, the commander told the woman who had a hand on Tibbs' shoulder. She hadn't gripped him at any point, only kept a hand there as if that was enough to keep him from running off. 4 days in the cell. Next time, don't bother me with him. We have a system in place for handling criminals. He's to go through it the same as others of his ilk. Yes, sir, she replied stiffly, then led Tibbs out. I'm sorry, she said after a few steps. I thought he'd be lenient after what you did for us. That didn't make Tibbs feel better about what he planned on doing and how it would impact her. The insult he could justify, because while she clearly felt bad about what he'd said, they would only lead to her training harder, hopefully. That she was one of his supporter among the guards didn't change that. What was coming? That could hurt her career. He was trying to think of ways he could make it up to her when they started down the stairs leading to the cells. With a medallion around his neck, it had been easy to move it around as he was searched so they wouldn't find it, and then put it on while they were busy looking over what they'd taken off him. The door on the left was clearly visible again. No visible lock, or one that he could sense, and the hinges were on the other side. Hopefully, whatever kept the door closed would give way because he wore the medallion. He breathed out a whispered, I'm sorry. He shot, then shoved her to the right and elbowed the door, which opened, and he ran. And he ran down the stairs. Her yells of "Stop!" sounded behind him. At the bottom, the man who looked more like a clerk than a guard looked. The man, more a clerk than a guard, looked up from the papers on the desk. His eyes shimmered in the light. Crystal. Tibbs felt essence move, and he slammed his will into that, undoing whatever the man was attempting. He hopped over the man and desk and ran down the short hall to the door at the end. He passed a room with a table and two unoccupied chairs, dice on it as well as the remnant of a meal. The door had a lock, but no weaves through it. He considered icing it so it would shatter on impact, but this wasn't about pissing off the guards any more than he already had. He made a wall of ice behind him and picks, then set to work on the lock. It opened as the ice cracked under an impact of crystal. Tibbs ran into the new room and stopped nearly immediately. He'd expected another hall, Another hall with doors where the confiscated items would be held. Serbo had only told him she'd delivered it to a large room, not that it was the only room there. Shelves were before him and seemed to be set in twos on his left and right, going further than he could see in the low light in all directions, further than he could sense. He stepped between the two facing him. Crates with numbers painting on them lined the shelves. In a few, he sensed weaves. From what Serba told him, he'd expected to only have to search a few rooms before finding the crates containing his stuff. Even if it had all been in one room, he'd figured he wouldn't have to look through more than a handful of them before knowing the ones that were his. This was larger than any merchant's warehouse could be, and there were far more items there. There were far more items than Tibs thought a town like Craggle Rock could have confiscated. Crystal wrapped around his feet and arms, locking him in place. He was grabbed and dragged, but he barely noticed. The crystal shattered into nothingness when he landed on the floor of a cell, and he didn't pay attention to the other occupants, giving him space as he stood and sat on a bench. That had been nothing like he'd expected. Was it even possible to find the armors, weapons, and tools the guard had taken from him among all those there? He'd have to find out what the number and letter on the crates meant. There had been an order to the few he saw, so it had to have meaning. Serba might help with that. He leaned back against the stone wall. He wasn't giving up on getting his stuff back. Not yet, at least. But it looked like he might have to consider it soon if what was painting on the crates didn't help. And that concludes chapter 47 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, as well as the previous books in the series, they are up for free on Royal Road. If you want to support me and read ahead of Royal Road, that is on my Patreon. We're about 20 chapters ahead at this time. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the note, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.